This week, Dungeons & Dragons announced that it was going to World of Warcraft. Then it announced it was going to Star Wars. Two very different genres, but all in one Universe Beyond package. Bandai then announced its new Naruto trading card game. Then Cyberpunk TCG arrived at Gen Con, having raised over $28 million on Kickstarter. Riftbound launched its fourth set, which by the way, it would be nice if we could get here in South Africa. And Magic the Gathering is heading back to Middle-earth. They're really taking the whole there and back again very seriously. Welcome to Nat One Week in Review, where we're going to take a look at what's happening across the tabletop gaming space. We're going to tell you what actually happened, why it matters, and where these games are actually heading. Because we are sitting here in South Africa, we are going to keep asking the question that international tabletop news doesn't always answer. Can we actually get the game here? What's coming into the country? Can we get some good organized play looking at you, Magic the Gathering? And sitting in the distribution pipeline, what we are allowed to talk about. And what games are potentially going to become important for South African players. And this week is a particularly good place to start thanks to Gen Con wrapping up. Maybe one day Nat One will be able to attend Gen Con, but that won't be soon. So let's get into it. D&D's big new direction. Let's start with probably the biggest tabletop announcement of the week. Dungeons & Dragons is entering another major phase. Wizards of the Coast has announced a new initiative called D&D Universes Beyond. Magic the Gathering has already been using the Universes Beyond label to bring outside intellectual property into Magic. We've had things like Lord of the Rings, Fallout, Final Fantasy, Marvel, and more. Those sets have become an increasingly important part of Magic's business. Now, D&D appears to be taking some of that thinking and applying it to their role-playing games. The first big crossover is World of Warcraft. The upcoming D&D book is designed to allow players to bring Warcraft directly into their campaigns. That means we're not simply talking about a book containing World of Warcraft artwork. We're talking about playable races, subclasses, monsters, spells, locations, and other material designed to work inside the D&D rules. For a World of Warcraft player, the appeal is obvious. You spent years exploring Azeroth. Now you can potentially take that world and actually run a tabletop adventure inside it. But Warcraft wasn't the announcement that really stopped people. That was Star Wars. Wizards has announced a Star Wars D&D experience for 2027, and this is significant because Star Wars isn't just another fantasy setting being adapted into D&D, it's one of the largest entertainment properties on the planet. Imagine running a campaign where your players aren't fighting Nalbay, they're fighting a bunch of stormtroopers. Or even traveling between worlds, or playing a campaign during the Rebellion. The settings are endless. But here's the clever part. Wizards is not abandoning its D&D audience while chasing giant licenses. It is also bringing back classic D&D settings, Greyhawk, Dragonlance, and Darksun. Darksun in particular is an interesting choice. For anyone unfamiliar with it, Darksun is very different from the more traditional heroic fantasy version of D&D. It is a brutal desert world where resources are scarce and magic has consequences, and survival is often the point. So Wizards is simultaneously saying, look at all these worlds, while also saying to long-term players, we haven't forgotten about you. And I think this is the important part. Wizards has learned something from Magic. A tabletop game doesn't necessarily have to reside in one specific universe. It can become a platform. Magic can be Magic one week, Final Fantasy the next, and The Hobbit after that. D&D is now potentially saying, bring your favorite universe to the table. For South African players, the immediate question is obviously going to be availability. Licensed D&D products don't always arrive exactly the same way or at exactly the same time in every territory. So we'll be watching which of these products actually makes its way into our market. Now, let's move on from one established giant to one of the most interesting new trading card games in the market. If you haven't guessed already, it's Cyberpunk TCG. If you missed this one, which the only way you would is living under your magic cards, here is the short version. It was absolutely enormous on Kickstarter. The campaign raised more than $28 million from more than 50,000 backers. That is extraordinary amount of money for a tabletop game. But here is something that's very important you need to understand. A successful Kickstarter does not automatically make a successful trading card game, or any game in general. A TCG needs players, it needs retailers, and it needs regular releases. It needs organized play, and perhaps most importantly, it needs people playing against each other. Because if I buy a booster box and there isn't anyone to play with in my local game shop, I just have a very expensive collection. And nobody to show it off to. What's the point of that? That is why Gen Con is important for Cyberpunk. Weirdco isn't simply showing people the cards, they are beginning to build the infrastructure around the game. There are organized play programs. Retailers can apply to become official stores, and there are planned pre-release events, weekly Night City brawls, and a larger Night City Showdown event. Now, those names might sound like marketing fluff, but it is actually the machinery that keeps the TCG alive. And the Cyberpunk license gives it something else. A world that people already understand. Night City, corporations, street gangs, cyberware, and mercenaries. And characters that already have a fan base. Now, the challenge is converting that interest into people who aren't just collecting Cyberpunk cards, but actually sitting down and playing Cyberpunk. The Cyberpunk route in South Africa is not as straightforward yet, and we are still keeping a close eye on distribution. Because if this game becomes one of the new major TCGs, South African players are going to want to get their hands on it. I know my dad does. Because it's a big gaming IP, you can read more about it in issue 13. Links in the description below. Now let's talk about another TCG, where the game itself is not the problem. Distribution is. Riftbound is Riot Games' trading card game built around League of Legends, and it has been growing steadily since launch. The latest set is Vendetta. Vendetta is the game's fourth major set. It introduces new cards and expands the existing card pool, giving players new strategies to build around. And unlike some smaller TCG launches, Riot and UVS are already building a serious organized play ecosystem around Riftbound. Gen Con has featured demos, sealed events, 2v2 play, and other competitive formats. So internationally, Riftbound is moving forward. Here is the problem. Solarpop has been trying to source Vendetta for South Africa. But the supplier they are dealing with does not have territorial rights to supply the product to South Africa. And UVS has apparently confirmed that there is no spare stock available for the local market. So this isn't a case of South Africa simply being forgotten. It is a distribution rights problem. And these are the sort of behind the scenes issues most players do not see. This set can be sitting on shelves through one country while another country can't legally source it through the same channels. For the South African Riftbound players, the question now is when. Here is a product that could have major implications over the next couple of years. Bandai is making a Naruto trading card game. The Naruto Card Game is currently targeting a worldwide launch in 2027. And Gen Con has given their players the first opportunity to learn more about the game. Bandai isn't just a newcomer to the space, it already has One Piece, Dragon Ball Z, Digimon, and Gundam, now Naruto. These aren't completely separate experiments. Bandai has been building a portfolio of anime games and entertainment-based TCGs. And each one is competing for the same thing. Your money, your shelf space, and your time. Naruto has an enormous global fanbase, but that doesn't guarantee a successful TCG. The game needs a reason for existing beyond the logo and the booster pack. And that is exactly what we'll be watching as more details emerge. For South Africa, we're still in the wait and see phase. But because Bandai has already established a distribution footprint here, Naruto is definitely one worth putting on the radar. Now, enough cardboard. Let's talk RPGs. Because while D&D is expanding into Star Wars and Warcraft, Daggerheart is trying to establish itself as a serious competitor. What is Daggerheart? Daggerheart comes from Darrington Press, the publishing company associated with Critical Role, and the game is built around a different approach to role-playing. Instead of every action simply being a question of whether you roll high enough, the dice can introduce another layer of narrative consequences. That gives the GM and players a different way of handling success, failure, and what happens next. But the important thing coming out of Gen Con isn't simply another book. Darrington Press is building out the Daggerheart ecosystem. Hope and Fear expands the game with new player options and a much larger catalogue of adversaries and environments. And the company has been talking about additional worlds, digital support, actual plays, and other ways of expanding the game. That is significant because the real battle between RPGs isn't really what book is better. It's which game gives you a reason to keep playing. And now to one of the safest bets in tabletop. Magic the Gathering! More specifically, The Hobbit. The set releases on August 14th, with pre-releases beginning the week before. This is another example of what we've been talking about all episode. A famous intellectual property being turned into a tabletop product. But here's the difference. This is a product that already has an established path into South Africa. Solarpop has The Hobbit in its upcoming Magic the Gathering range, along with all the other releases to come. So if you're a South African Magic player, this is the one you don't need to wonder whether the products actually exist. You just need to grab it in time. And when you put all of these stories together, another trend becomes increasingly hard to ignore. The trading card game market is getting crowded. Like, claustrophobia crowded. We have got the established giants like Pokemon, Magic, and even Disney Lorcana is making its way into popularity. Bandai continues to expand its ever-expansive portfolio with One Piece, Gundam, Dragon Ball Z, Digimon, and now Naruto. Riot Games is pushing Riftbound, and Cyberpunk TCG is arriving with a whole lot of funding behind it. And then, there is the other game that is particularly interesting for us, Star Wars Unlimited. Unlike some of the newer games we're talking about, Star Wars Unlimited has already established itself as a serious TCG with an organized play structure and a growing card pool. And obviously the license gives it an enormous advantage. But the important thing about Star Wars Unlimited is that it simply isn't trading on the Star Wars name. The game is built around head-to-head play, with players constructing decks around leaders and building their forces around different aspects of the Star Wars universe. That means the game can keep expanding as Fantasy Flight Games introduces new eras, new characters, and new mechanics. Star Wars Unlimited isn't competing only against other Star Wars games. It's competing for the same players' time as Magic, Pokemon, One Piece, Lorcana, Riftbound, and other TCGs on the shelf. For South African players, Star Wars Unlimited is one to keep an eye on because it is already part of the tabletop ecosystem here in South Africa. The more interesting question is how the local player base develops around it. Because with the TCG, having the product available is only half the equation. Like we've said before, you need players, you need stores, and you need organized play. And you need enough people that someone can actually walk into a game store and find an opponent. The problem is not finding a trading card game anymore. There are almost too many. The question is which ones can build a community strong enough to survive the competition. And before the board game players accuse us of spending too much time on the cardboard, remember your cardboard too, but don't worry, your time has come, we're gonna get into it. One of the interesting releases is Sanibel from Avalon Hill. It's designed by Elizabeth Hargrave, the designer behind Wingspan, and it's already picked up recognition at the UK Games Expo. Czech Games Edition also has new material around codenames, SETI, and Lost Ruins of Arnak. And this is yet another reason why Gen Con is such an important event. You don't just get one company's announcement. You get the entire industry showing what it thinks players are going to be buying over the next year. So let's bring everything back home. Magic the Gathering The Hobbit is releasing on August 14th. Local product is already appearing in the distribution pipeline, preparing for pre-release. Riftbound Vendetta released internationally, currently a distribution problem for South Africa. Cyberpunk TCG's massive international interest, organized-play being established, and South African distribution still something we're watching. The Naruto Card Game from Bandai launches 2027 worldwide, and South Africa's availability is still unknown. And this is what we want to track every week, not just what publishers announce, not just what American retailers have, but what actually reaches tabletops here in South Africa. And that is our first week in review. If there is one thing that stands out to me with this week's news, it's that tabletop gaming is getting bigger. But it is also getting more competitive. We are seeing enormous established brands expanding into new areas. We are seeing new games raising extraordinary amounts of money. We are seeing publishers building organized play ecosystems. And we are seeing more and more games competing for the same players. For us in South Africa, there is an additional layer, availability and distribution. And that is what we are going to be following every week. So if you want to know what's going to be happening in tabletop and what it actually means for us here in South Africa, we'll see you next Monday. If you think we missed a game or story that deserves to be heard, let us know in the comments. We'll be watching it. Be sure to check out our free digital magazine on all tabletop games. See you in the issue.